wanted to start with how are you guys doing? That was a very long trial, 8 weeks. You guys had very weighty decisions to make. You guys saw a lot of graphic evidence, very emotional testimony you heard. How are you guys doing? What's the emotional impact of that?
I think it's extremely emotional. Like, I went home and slept for 24 hours. Every day was different. Some days were very emotional, and then some days not so much, but the last 4 days have been highly emotional. The last 4 days were highly emotional, at least for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're gonna know the full impact of the trial for a while.
And that's my concern, is I don't know when it's going to hit, what's going to hit. Is it going to be tomorrow? Is it going to be a week? It's going to be a year. That's my concern as we go forward with this.
Yeah, that's me too. It is a little jarring to just be totally done with it. The end happened so fast for me that it's going to be weird to get back to normal.
Yeah, you'll be going along, everything is good one day, along the day, and bam, all of a sudden it hits you, and it kind of takes you out for a little bit.
What was it like as you were sitting there? You guys didn't want to get into any details, which totally understand, but what was it like to, watch Colby Ryan, JJ and Tylee's brother, sit there and cry, saying he's left motherless, brotherless, sisterless? What was it like to hear some of just that devastating testimony and see some of those really, really graphic photos?
It caught me by surprise as how much impact it had on me. There couldn't be a dry eye in the house when he talked, when all of Tammy's relatives talked, when Tylee's aunt talked. It all comes home with how many people and lives this affected. Of course, it took out 3 people that had their whole lives ahead of them, but in addition to that, all of their family and friends. It will affect forever.
I think that was definitely the hardest day, right?
Oh,
Friday
absolutely.
was by far the hardest day.
Yeah.
It was very emotionally
Definitely.
draining, very. You just felt the emotions right there with them. You were feeling every single thing that they felt.
And I like to think that I was prepared for the testimony, if you will, the evidence. I wasn't ready for the emotional side of it, though I knew it was coming. But when it happened, you mentioned Colby, it hit home and it hit hard.
Let's kind of start from the beginning a little bit with the first verdict. What led you guys to decide that Chad was guilty? What were the deciding factors? I believe you guys deliberated for about 7 hours. I know most of you were deliberating jurors, one alternate here. So what was that like?
The prosecution had an overwhelming amount of evidence.
Sorry, Ray, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, as Roy was mentioning, it was an overwhelming case. I think part of the length of the deliberation, not that there's a right amount or too long or too short, was the overwhelming case. But we wanted to make sure we were thorough, and was there something we were missing? And the group that was in there couldn't have asked for a better group, and we went through it. If someone had questions, we dove in, we found the answers, we found whatever supported where we were going, discussed, is there something that we didn't think of that would change our minds? So I'm very proud of the group that we had, that we did a thorough job and discussed everything. But as Roy mentioned, the prosecution put up a great case, and it made our decision, I don't want to say easy, but it pointed us in a direction pretty quickly.
I would agree with that. The prosecution did a great job in covering all their bases and putting forth all the evidence. So it was understandable in our terms, so we could understand it. They did a great job.
What I didn't realize, not being on a jury before, at least a jury like this one, that there is a set sequence that you have to go through to say if this is true and this is true and this has evidence, then at the end you really don't have another choice but to either be guilty or not guilty, depending on how you answered all of those specific questions matched to the evidence.
I know as an alternate, and we had talked about it afterwards, there was complete support for the 12 that were deliberating.
So if the deliberating jurors were different,
it wouldn't have mattered.
Wouldn't have mattered.
Not at all.
Yeah, it seemed to me that everybody was already on the same page, and again, as Steve said, we all just wanted to be very sure, because it's a big decision. It's very important to get it right.
And unlike Lori's case, you guys had 2 very, very weighty decisions to make. You guys had to decide if the state proved aggravating factors like were the murders especially heinous, atrocious, cruel, that Chad showed an utter disregard for life, you guys said yes for all of the aggravating factors. What was it like making that decision? How hard was it to decide that he deserved death?
That was probably the hardest part that we
It
went
was
through.
very difficult, but the way that the statute reads is if there's not enough mitigating factors to override the aggregating factors, you must find the death sentence, the death penalty comes, that's what comes in. You don't have a choice, and there's one mitigating factor that, if you had enough empathy, but there weren't enough mitigating factors to override all 8 of those aggravating factors, and I think we all felt the same way on that.
We were surprised he didn't say anything at the end. Not that that would have changed our mind at all, but at least it would have been maybe eye-opening to say, okay, are there mitigating factors that should come into play? And no.
It was quite surprising, I think, to all of us.
Yeah. We were waiting to hear from him. Like, what's your
Yeah, with no attempt to even ask for consideration.
Right.
Yeah.
Waiting to hear from Chad or waiting for the defense to put up experts? They could have called mental health experts. They
Either
could have
one.
called Chad's
But
family.
Chad was the biggest deal.
Both. It's like, why didn't he say something to plead for his life? Why didn't he show any remorse? Why, there were a lot of things that we felt that he could have done to possibly, put some mitigating factors in there. There just weren't enough mitigating factors given.
He didn't struggle on Friday like we did. No, that was his family that were on the stand, the victim statements.
I've been in court for the last 2 weeks. I saw Chad smile a couple of times, but for most of the entire time, he was very emotionless, barely showed anything on his face. And I noticed during both of the decisions being read that, especially during the death penalty one, that you guys in the jury box weren't really looking at him. Was that conscious? Were you guys looking at him? Were you not? Was it hard to look at him, considering all of the evidence that was presented in the case that the state put on?
Personally, I didn't have a problem looking at him, and I wanted to see his reaction. But to your point, he was stoic throughout. He didn't show much emotion. You mentioned he laughed a couple of times. You may have witnessed the only times that he did. He was stone-faced most of the time, but no, I did attempt to make an eye contact. And part of that was a conscious decision because I looked at some of the people in the gallery, the family, the grandfather. Then I knew I would have lost it as well.
Yes, it was hard to look at the gallery. That's what really got me. But Chad never even turned around once and acknowledged the jury. He stared at the judge the whole time. We never got a full face view of him ever during either sentencing.
That's who I was watching, was him, for any reaction, any remorse, just anything, and nothing. Absolutely nothing.
You guys made the decision that Chad deserves death based on Idaho law. So you guys were looking at everything that was presented to you and seeing, did it meet all of this criteria listed under Idaho code? It wasn't just you guys going in there and being like, hey, I think he gets this, I think he deserves this. You guys read through the law, you compared it. What is that like, sentencing somebody to death? I mean, that is just a huge decision to make. Does that weigh very heavily on you guys, or was it something, you guys sat through 8 weeks of a very, very hard trial? Was it something that, you came to the end and you were like, yes, it checks all the boxes?
Whether they deserve it or not, it's not an easy thing to do.
It was very emotional, still is very emotional. When I think about it, I'm sure all these guys feel the same. Knowing that you were one of 12, one of 18 that condemned somebody basically to death. That's a heavy burden to live with the rest of your entire life.
How hard was it not to be able to talk to one another? You guys were told not to show any emotion while the trial was going on. You guys were basically just in it by yourselves for 8 weeks. What was that like? And then what was it like to finally be able to deliberate and be able to talk?
It was really hard, I think, some days, especially when we call it the mic drop moments a couple times in the trial, when we wanted to go back in and go, did you see that? What does that mean? And I think we had about, 45 minutes to an hour. Once we got the case, we all sat down and said, okay, we're just going to be able just anybody say anything they want, ask any questions, talk, throw it out there. I think that was hugely important to be able just to lay it all on there before we started actually, going through line by line.
I think one of the hardest things though is for the alternates is they didn't get that opportunity. They didn't get to immediately discuss it. So they had to hold all that in until it was completely over.
That was a minute by minute.
And only see the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. That 7-ish hours you refer to was, just take that by minutes. That was just torture.
That you mentioned earlier, 18 people that know nobody in the room put together. The one thing we have in common, we can't talk about. That part was tough, especially in the beginning. As we got to know each other, you started learning about families, friends, whatnot, interests, hobbies. But that, for me at least, that first initial week is the only connection I have to these people is what I can't talk to them about.
Right. Watching the same,
Watching the same show
channel,
and you
the
can't
same
discuss
show for however many weeks and don't talk about it.
Yeah, it seemed like just about every time we went back into the jury room, it's just silent for a few minutes. Like the one thing on your mind, can't talk about it.
Are you guys kind of bonded for life now? What is that like, going through that, and obviously an experience that just you guys have?
I don't think there's any way that we can't be. Again, we had 18 great people. One wasn't able to finish with us, but still someone I consider a friend. We'll always be there. If I run into any of these people, out and about, give them a big hug and not even think twice about it.
And then
Absolutely.
one thing, oh, go ahead, Roy.
No, you're fine.
One thing that I always think about too that came to my mind yesterday is the appeals and the execution date. If and when an execution date comes, I'm sure all of us will be together again, because that's going to be a heavy day for all of us.
Absolutely. It's like new extended family.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we know he could just spend the rest of his life on death row.
He could.
Too, so not over yet. I wanted to backtrack a little bit. I was curious. On Friday, I was talking to people who were waiting in the hallway, and they were annoyed. That was the word that they used, that the decision was taking so long. They thought it would come a lot faster for the death penalty. Did it take about 8 hours just because it takes a long time to go through all of those factors and really look at everything and make sure that you guys are doing your due diligence?
I think it was both that, but also this was a huge decision, and it weighed more heavy than the guilty verdict. And we had to be sure. We had to be sure. We had to understand what it was saying. It was also written very legalese, and we had an issue with that. Just making sure we understood it, asking the judge questions, and dotting your I's and crossing your T's, but just making sure that we're making the right decision. That was the most important.
And by 7 o'clock Friday night, I know me as one and several others, we were so emotionally exhausted that we felt like we needed to come back fresh and take another look at it and give ourselves the night to think about it, to think if there are any other questions, do we want to discuss anything else, take that time to ourselves and really mull it over and then come back fresh on Saturday, and that's what we did, and I think it was the best thing for all of us to do.
And we had to make sure that everybody was comfortable with the decision and talk through it and make sure, we've got to wake up the next morning knowing that this is a decision that we made. And, across the board, everybody was supportive. We talked through it. When there was somebody going, well, what about this? We made sure that we went through it as thoroughly as possible, because again, all of us had to wake up, Sunday morning and be comfortable with what happened.
Is there anything that you guys want to say to any of the victims' families who were in court for 8 weeks, or some of them who showed up just this last week? I know even not one of the victims' family members, but Chad's brother and Chad's sister-in-law, they were there throughout the trial. Anything that you would want to say to them?
I hope it gives them some closure.
In a way, I think they were a little bit of security, reassurance for us. Like they were there supporting us, and we felt that.
Because you've had a lot of the same family members and the detectives and the police and the FBI that have been handling this for 4 years. I mean, even the judge and the prosecution, this has been their life for 4.5 years. So it was like we were on the end of the great big group that have just had this huge life-changing, never be the same again action.
Yeah, and I feel like we can't know exactly how they feel, but going through and listening to all the testimony and everything that these people have gone through for the last 4 years, including the prosecutors and the law enforcement officers, the FBI, many of them cried, many of them had tears, and it was just, it was extremely emotional for all those people, and I think that's something that I still feel. You know, my heart breaks for every single one of those people, knowing that they were actually there, that they went through it, that they had to find the children, that, you know, it was a horrific thing. The whole thing was beyond horrific, I would say. It was,
Well, knowing how much it hurt us,
yeah.
there's no way to ever fully understand.
And I think one of
their position.
The unanswered questions to me that just, it seemed like, especially Tammy's family, is still going to be, I mean, you're going to be in pain forever, losing your sister and daughter and everything. But the fact that Chad's children, or at least some of them as we understand, don't have a relationship with them anymore is more than heartbreaking to me. And that just kind of puts a bad ending to something that maybe there could have been closure, but really there's not for them, you know, for Tammy's family.
They could lean on one another, and
Right.
and that's not happening.
And I go back, and I know they mentioned it. We talk about the victims, the family himself. It's the law enforcement as well. They gathered all the information. They took the pictures that we don't want to talk about for obvious reasons. My hat goes off to them. They lived this for 4 years, and you know, they're as much a victim as anybody else, in my opinion. Yes, the family members lost a daughter, sister, grandson. Law enforcement, tip of the cap to them.
I'm curious, I'm trying to think the best way to phrase this. As you're sitting there and you're looking and you're listening to everything and you're looking at Chad and you found him guilty, what is it like to look at him? What do you think about him? What was that like as you were sitting there? Did you guys get angry at points?
I got very angry, especially the more you had the evidence of what emails he sent, what texts he sent, what he said about children that weren't even his, that he needed to raise the pain and turn up the dark. And it was like, this is unbelievable that this person is that much of a narcissist, to think he was the Holy Ghost, to think he was at the right hand of God. I just don't know how someone gets to that point.
He had no
Absurd.
regard. Yeah, he had no regard for human life. It didn't matter to him, and he had no remorse the whole time.
It doesn't feel like it still matters.
No.
Like it doesn't matter now, somehow, to him.
The only thing I saw was at the very end, it was like on the 5th death sentence that got handed out, and I was watching him, and he was looking at the judge, and I could see his chin quiver a little bit. And I thought, well, there might be an ounce of fear there. I'm not sure it's remorse, but maybe fear, and that's really the only thing that I ever saw.
And it was true. He would do anything, at least at that point in his life, to have all of the obstacles out of the way so he could go live his Hawaiian dream with Lori. And that's what it was all about.
Before we wrap up here, anything that you guys would like to touch on, expand on, just add?
The only thing I have is, again, 18 people who didn't know each other, came together. I couldn't have asked for a better group. There was nobody in there that I thought was an outlier, that was, causing trouble, making things difficult. Overall, fantastic group. The marshals mentioned before that we got lucky, and again, I feel I'm lucky to have served with these people.
The marshals and the court, the judge came in afterwards and shook all of our hands. He was even emotional because this has been his life, and he's got to see all of this more than we have. But the marshals and just the clerks and everybody associated with Ada County up there treated us really well. They were amazing.
Yeah, it made it easier to go through this. It's not easy. It wasn't easy. It still isn't easy, but they really accommodated us, and they treated us very well. And like Steve said, the 18 of us, I don't think we could have asked for a better group of people. It made it.
Not a single argument even.
It made it much easier,
well.
right, to go through.
And there were times we were just laughing hysterically over something. I mean, when we couldn't talk about
Well,
anything else,
slap happy.
we react. Like, it's like we're punch drunk or something.
Right.
But it was kind of like surreal. Like, we just had to go in there and talk, but then we can come out here and joke about, one of the deputies did something, or you know, a clerk did something. And
One thing that we did all say is there are certain words in our vocabulary that will never mean the same to any of us either again. And yeah, and that'll be forever.
Okay. So just to clarify, the deliberation, you guys were all pretty much on the same page for both of them, correct?
We were.
The penalty phase and the sentencing phase and the guilty or not guilty verdict.
You were.
We had questions, but we just talked through it. Everything came out just fine.
Okay. Any questions before we wrap up?
I was thinking, is there one part of the trial that really stands out to you that's going to like linger in your life forever?
April 11th of 2024, I will never forget. It's the first day we saw the bodies, and it'll never leave my mind.
I agree, it's burned into your brain. I don't care if they showed us a picture once or 10 times, it's there, and it will always be there.
Can't unsee it.
Yeah.
My question would be, what are your next steps? How do you feel like you're going to move forward? How are you going to support you?
Well, the court system, they did hand out some paperwork for us to seek counseling, and it will be reimbursed. So that was very much appreciated. So I know that's one step that I personally, and I don't know about the rest of everybody, but personally, just to get it off my chest and talk to somebody who wasn't involved, it will definitely take that step.
well, and just be thankful for what you have. You know, those little things in
100%.
life that are annoyances mean nothing compared to what all of the families have gone through.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Then getting back into the normal routine of our life before this, I think will help as well. You know, just getting back to normal.
It'd be really nice at work, though, if we walked in and everyone had to rise.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You guys got used to it.
Somebody deciding what lunch is.
Yeah.
And it's served at noon.
And driving us. We had to go park in a parking garage and be driven every day by the
Oh, wow.
marshals and vans. And
Interesting.
we called them our handlers.
Somebody should check the hallway or the restrooms before we go down them. We definitely were protected. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess the only thing I would have is just, this kind of process, and it's a very long process. And do you have a different outlook on it now that you've gone through it, as far as the jury process and having to deal with all that? Does it give you a different outlook on the system in general, I guess?
I have more respect for the system. Not
Definitely.
that I never didn't, but when you actually get to see how it works, that it's there's different things set into it, that it's harder than I think you think watching TV dramas, that you don't just go in there and everybody say guilty, not guilty, and fight about it. There's actually a procedure that you go through and what the prosecution has to prove to get to the result.
I think the fairness of it is what I found that maybe I didn't always think was that way, but it's a very fair system.
They were diligent.
They were diligent, and the defense, they were given every opportunity to defend him, to show evidence, to bring in witnesses, to give mitigating factors. I think it's a very fair system.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you guys so much. And
You bet.
obviously, thank you guys for your service over the last 8 weeks. We really appreciate you guys coming in and talking to us. So